Thanks so much, Jeff. Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to have you here. My name is Megan Brown. I'm a training specialist with ASN. We are so lucky and happy to have Adri Shaw here from the Office of Audit and Debt Resolution. I knew I would get tongue-tied. So we're so happy to have him, and I will just turn it right on over to Adri to get started with our webinar today.
Thank you, Megan, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. As Megan said, I'm Idris Shah, the Deputy Director for the Office of Audit and Debt Resolution. And thank you and warm welcome to all of you for joining today's briefing on the core functions of the Office of Audit and Debt Resolution, or OADR, as we go in short form. I have organized, as you can see here on the agenda today, not just an overview or to offer an overview into OADR's core functions, but also to provide a brief overview of key requirements and the support systems that we have across our various domains. So whether you are here to brush up on your understanding of OADR's functions or want to just lay a foundation for potential future partnerships, especially if you have not engaged with us previously, you are in the right place. So without further ado, let's look at this agenda and just quickly do a review just to make sure we understand the specifics of what I will be covering or addressing in today's session. So I will start by just talking a little bit about the team, making sure we are, you are aware of the structure that we have. We'll move on to do an overview of the single audits, as well as talking about the process of the resolution that we support here in OADR. So we will spend a bit of more time compared to other topics on single audits overall, just given the extent of the scope of the work that's involved there. And then we will move on to talking a little bit about the OIG audits and the audit resolution process around OIG audits overall. And then we will talk about the debt collection and debt management activities. And as I talk about these as it relates to OADR's role, I will also be talking about the requirements pertaining to each domain. And then we'll talk about the indirect cost rate negotiation process, where AmeriCorps is the cognizant agency. And we will end our session with a Q&A, but before that, I will be also sharing a little bit about a new indirect cost guidance that some of you have been looking forward to for its release. So moving on to our team structure. This is who we are. Those of you who are already familiar with OADR may notice an updated structure in this chart, and that's because we just bid farewell to one of our team members, Salima Shabazz, this past week, and are preparing to bid actually farewell to another team member, Colleen Johnson, this week, both of whom who were on a temporary basis with us, and their service have been concluded. We are grateful for their service to AmeriCorps, but we'll certainly miss their contributions to our team. As you can see in this chart, OADR is structurally located within the Office of Monitoring, with Caroline Fernandez as the acting director for both the Office of Monitoring and OADR. And I have the privilege of working with this exceptional group of professionals, each dedicated to upholding the diverse and critical operations of OADR in support of all of you. And this structure has really been shaped up just over the past year and a half or so. So each member brings really a unique set of skills to support our collective efforts. So what are these exact efforts that we support? Let's take the functional areas here. And as you can see, the OADR team overall leverages the expertise of our team across these four functional domains that we consider integral to our commitment to uphold and maintain the highest level of operational compliance. And these key areas, as you can see, are audits that encompass both single audits as well as resolution of audits for OIG that are conducted by OIG, and then the pivotal role of the debt collections or debt management activities that we undertake. And last but not least, the nuanced area of indirect cost rate negotiation as a whole. I strongly believe that everyone on the call here agree with me that with each of these domains, essential to our shared goal of operational excellence. So in the following slides, as I said in the agenda, we will explore each area in detail and explore how OADR contributes to supporting these functions specifically. So let's begin by covering some foundational information first about single audits. We'll start by examining maybe first the origin of the authority behind the single audits and discuss the principal entities that are involved in the audit of the federal government and they're all on the federal government side. And then following that, we will delve into the scope of the audit a little bit and maybe take a look at an outline of the critical responsibilities of both auditees and federal agencies. And additionally, I've prepared a selection of essential references just for your consultation, which we will briefly go over these before shifting our focus to a specific discussion on OADR's role when it comes to the resolution process. So the source of authority, if you ask where is the source of authority for single audits are coming, it's really, the initial audit, first of all, the source is coming from the Single Audit Act that was initially enacted in 1984. But it has been amended over the years, and the last amendment took place in 1996 that was intended to achieve basically several goals, mainly to improve the efficiency of single audits, which, as you all know, are audits of an entity's financial statements and federal awards. And so these amendments aim to not just enhance the efficiency, but also to enhance the utility of the audits for federal agencies, the auditees, as well as the public in general. And to summarize these key objectives here, I have listed a few bullet points here. The 3 bullet points that you see here are not all the details of the goals, but just a summary of the objectives of the Single Audit Act that was last amended. And first is to promote sound financial management, including effective internal controls. To achieve this goal, the amendments, set more explicit guidelines on various matters, right? For example, for auditors performing single audits, the Single Audit Act has specified requirements related to their qualifications and responsibilities. This is one of the reasons, for example, why the generally accepted government auditing standards and GAGAS that we will talk a little more about has explicit requirements for auditors to have continuing education, for example, and have necessary education to ensure that they have adequate knowledge of government programs. So this was aimed really at enhancing the reliability and quality of the audit findings as a whole. Second bullet point here, to establish uniform requirements for audits of federal awards. Having, a uniform requirement meant simply a streamlined audit process for entities receiving federal funds. So the amendments updated, for example, the threshold. The initial threshold was $250,000. It was increased to $300,000, and as you know, currently it's at $750,000 and more. But by updating the threshold for requiring single audit, the amendments, sought to reduce the audit burden, specifically on smaller entities that receive less federal funding, while also still maintaining accountability for entities that manage significant amounts of federal awards. So this meant that amendments aim to ensure audits were more risk focused, right? Risk-based focused. And so, in other words, those programs that pose a higher risk of non-compliance with laws and regulations, that's shifting that focus to a risk-based approach. And also to help allocate, audit efforts more effectively. So these uniform requirements also strengthened the mechanisms for federal agencies to follow on audit findings. For example, ensuring that identified issues are addressed and corrected by the audited entities. And this is another reason why, for example, in the uniform guidance, those of you who are familiar with the subpart F of the uniform guidance, there is a specific language on the responsibilities of federal agency as well as the auditees in the audit process, which we will look into a bit more as well. And then lastly here, the third bullet point about reducing burden on state and local governments, Indian tribes, and nonprofit organizations. Again, one of the key outcomes of having a uniform requirement meant a reduced administrative and financial strain on state and local governments and nonprofit organizations. As you know, before the Single Audit Act, for example, each agency would conduct their own audit. But by having a Single Audit Act, the Single Audit Act means one consolidated audit for all federal programs, rather than each agency having their own individual or separate audit. So by consolidating basically multiple agency auditing guidelines per the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, meant that the Act also significantly cut down duplicative efforts and costs as well. And how the Single Audit Act gets implemented, they are all in the uniform guidance. And the uniform guidance itself is the current regulation that implements the Single Audit Act, right? And in summary, the subpart F is specifically that deals with the requirements of single audit, provides critical guidance in several key areas. It establishes the threshold at which non-federal entities are required to conduct either a single audit or a program-specific audit. And again, here the focus is on several elements, like focusing on financial statements, adherence to federal statutes and regulations, as well as federal award conditions. The subpart F also specifies the criteria for choosing competent auditors and mandates disclosure of audit outcomes, particularly those pertaining to financial management, award expenditures, and internal controls. And the subpart F additionally also details the requirements for summarizing the audit findings. You all may be familiar with the data collection form, or the SFSAC, that after the completion of the audit with that reporting package and the data collection form gets submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, or the FAC, that is now currently managed by the General Services Administration. And lastly, the subpart F goes on to set requirements about how audited entities must promptly address findings with federal agencies that monitor the execution of measures to ensure accountability, as well as adherence to the regulations. So as I'm talking about the audits, so as a process, you can imagine already that multiple entities are involved in the process, right? These different key players are engaged throughout the process. And on the federal government side, these are the key entities that you see on the slide here. We have the OMB. OMB is responsible, as you know, for issuance of and maintenance of the single audit regulation, and coordinating its updates with the grant-making federal agencies, the federal awarding agencies themselves, the Government Accountability Office. GAO is responsible for issuing government auditing standards. So you all know the very popular book, or the Yellow Book, the Government Auditing Standards, also known as the Yellow Book. So they set the standards about and for example, the GAGAS is a document that sets the standards for auditors to conduct audits. And then we have the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, which is the responsible entity for collecting and disseminating single audit information on behalf of OMB. And then we have single audit accountable official. This is typically a role that is played by the CFO of each federal awarding agency, the key management single audit liaison that is responsible for serving as the agency's management point of contact for single audit process within and outside the federal government. And in our case in AmeriCorps, it is the Deputy Director for the Office of Audit and Debt Resolution that represents the agencies in various platforms, including the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, when it comes to discussions around compliance supplement or standards for audits. The next point I wanted to, as I mentioned at the end, the foundations of single audit, the scope of the audit itself. Here, when an audit is required, or when a single audit is required. We know it's conducted when a federal non-entity expends $750,000 or more in federal awards. Here you see a reference to direct and indirect, meaning that if, in total, if your organization is receiving $750,000 either directly from a federal agency or through a pass-through entity, meaning all sources of federal funds combined is $750,000 or more, your organization will be subject to conduct a single audit. And I have included, as you can see there, references to the specific sections of the 2 CFR. For example, if you're interested to learn more about the qualifications or the scope for when an audit is conducted, they are all stipulated further under the 2 CFR 200, section 501, paragraph B. And so, this specific elements include like financial statements, internal control, compliance, audit follow-up, and the data collection form that I just mentioned earlier. So it specifies all those details in the scope under that section of 501, section paragraph B. And then, this another part of the scope of the audit is to ensure that the audit is conducted in accordance with GAGAS. As a reminder, GAGAS, or Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards, again, are a set of guidelines for auditors who are working on government audits specifically. GAGAS is commonly referred to, as I said earlier, the Yellow Book. This is just simply because the cover of the book was yellow in the 70s, and it became popular under the reference of Yellow Book. So it's just, if you hear GAGAS, that's synonymous to Yellow Book. So these are the standards that are published by the United States Government Accountability Office, as I said, the GAO. GAGAS provides a framework for conducting high quality audits with competence, integrity, and objectivity, but most importantly, independence here, right? So GAGAS is applicable to a wide range of audits, including financial audits, and we will talk about OIG audits. OIG audits are predominantly about performance audits. So it also provides standards to performance audits, in addition to the various other types of audits. But the idea of these standards are, they are designed just to ensure that the government audits are performed with a high standard, providing a reliable, useful, and timely information to stakeholders and the public as a whole. And you may also, maybe something here to highlight is that GAGAS is distinguished by its broader scope. For example, GAS, while it's applicable to nonprofit organizations and the nonprofit sector, GAS goes beyond a little bit, and it provides additional requirements. For example, standards for ethics or auditor independence, or what I mentioned earlier about continuing education. So, for example, CPA firms are required to renew and update their knowledge of the programs and obtain certifications on a continuous basis to ensure that the quality of audit. And then it obviously covers the entire operations of the non-federal entity. While the single audit includes a review of financial statements, that I said, which can provide insight into the overall financial operations of the entity, one of the main purposes is to evaluate the entity's handling of federal awards, right? So this includes how funds are spent, for example, whether the expenditures are allowable under the terms of the federal program, or whether the entity has adequate internal controls in place to manage federal awards or funds effectively. And so, auditors provide an opinion on whether financial statements, I have a missing word there. So if auditor provides an opinion. So auditors provide an opinion on whether financial statements are presented fairly. So it's not just the financial statements, but also the compliance with the federal statutes, regulations, and conditions of the federal award. Before I advance to the next slide, I did mention about the $750,000 threshold. I think you all may know from the public comment that was released last year by the OMB. The OMB intends to change this threshold. And I think you may all know that the last proposed change by OMB is to increase this threshold from $750,000 to $1 million. This is not a final change. I repeat, this is not a final change, but that's what OMB intends to increase that threshold. So, which means that moving forward, once the uniform guidance or the changes or revisions to the uniform guidance is implemented, there will be an effective date that would show, this new threshold that the OMB has proposed. And again, that's to reduce the burden on states and nonprofits and other local organizations that are subject to single audit. So moving on to the next slide here, about the responsibility. I talked about the responsibilities or the different key players that are involved on the government side. And now here on the auditee side, what are some of the responsibilities that they have? So auditees, as you can see here, must arrange for a single audit just to ensure that it's properly performed and is submitted timely. And as you all know, the submission of the final report with the data package is submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. That is the entity that houses the audit information. The auditee is responsible to ensure that the data elements are all completed in the data collection form, or the DCF. As I said earlier, it is also referred to as the SFSAC form. And so, ensuring that that form is complete. And then, if there are findings, making sure that the auditee promptly follow up and take corrective action on the audit findings. And lastly, here on this slide, the auditor responsibilities. Auditor also has certain responsibilities here to ensure, for example, that the compliance testing include test of transactions and other auditing procedures that are necessary for them to provide provide the auditor with sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to be able to support an opinion. So again, here the idea is to provide a reasonable assurance, not an absolute assurance, right? So that's why the testing will have a limit. So it does not mean testing 100% of transactions of an organization there, but enough to be able to provide an opinion. Follow up on prior audit findings and sign the specified sections of the DCF. The data collection form is actually signed and verified and signed by both the auditee and the auditor, ensuring the completeness as well as the accuracy of the content. We have seen some errors in the past through our audit monitoring process, and really encourage you all to make sure to keep an eye on this when you certify and sign the DCF, to make sure that the information contained in this in the DCF is accurate, because there were instances, for example, that we have come across where the prime grantee, where the sub-recipient of the prime grantee indicated AmeriCorps as a direct donor or funder of that organization rather than their prime grantee, for instance. That's the part of the oversight of the monitoring that needs to be performed by the prime grantee, but we see similar anomalies in the DCF that are submitted by the prime grantees as well. And then lastly, determining whether the schedule of expenditure of federal awards is stated fairly in all material aspects in relation to the auditor's financial statement as well. So moving to the last piece here on federal agencies' responsibilities. Again, I have included a specific reference here. We here in AmeriCorps has specific responsibilities that are stipulated under Section 513 of the 2 CFR. Again, they are under the subpart F. Some of the key, I've only included here a summary of some of the key points here. So, for example, we provide technical audit advice and liaison assistance throughout the audit process as needed. We ensure that audits are, for example, completed and the reports are received timely. Received timely in this case, meaning by the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. We provide, annual updates to OMB about the compliance supplement. That's a document that, again, is a guidance that is provided to the auditors, where we provide guidance to auditors about how to conduct the audit or what tests we recommend for them to prioritize when they identify a program as major program or as a high-risk program, for example. But we will look into these a little more when as I delve into the other and into the following slide about the role of the OADR here in the audit resolution process. But just before turning into that slide, I have a slide here that shows that has some references, hopefully helpful for you all in case you need to, anyone wants to look into some of these specific references that I have looked into. We have the uniform guidance references specific to the parts that relate to the audits, the OMB financial management website. They have the compliance supplement, and that, again, the compliance supplement has a specific auditing guidance for each agency. The Government Accountability Office, or the Yellow Book for the government auditing standards. And then lastly, a link to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, or the fact that's now maintained by the General Services Administration, which used to be under the Census Bureau that was transitioned in October of last year. So now that we have covered, I know, as I said, I would spend some significant time here on the audits, on the single audits, but now that we have covered some of these basics about the requirements here, our role in OADR, comes to picture really when we identify findings. So, for example, in the single audit resolution process, some of the key activities that we perform or provide the support and assistance overall is we start by first identifying who's subject to the single audit, right? So we rely on the information that's submitted in the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. Once we identify who has submitted a single audit to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, we review that audit to identify whether there are any findings. And if we are serving the role of an oversight agency or a cognizant agency, we will have an expanded responsibility. For example, if we are the oversight agency, if there are cross-cutting findings, for example, meaning if there are findings that affect more than one federal award, we will serve as the main point of contact on behalf of all federal agencies to follow up on those findings. In instances where we are not the oversight agency or cognizant agency and have only provided direct funding, but the finding has affected our awards, we will also follow up on those findings directly with those organizations to make sure that there is a corrective action plan and that they have resolved and addressed all the findings related to AmeriCorps, or in cases where we are the oversight agency, if it's a cross-cutting finding, they have addressed those findings. We typically issue a management decision after reviewing the findings, and that happens within 6 months of the issuance of the report. And if there are findings that have not been resolved at the time when we issue the management decision, we follow up. We work with the auditee or the grantee to make sure that those findings are completely addressed within 12 months of the issuance of the audit report. At which point we may have to issue a notice of final action, and that happens only if there are open recommendations or findings in that are still open after the issuance of the management decision. As I said, as part of our federal responsibilities, we also maintain the compliance supplement. Again, OADR is the office in charge to ensure that we provide that annual updates to OMB and to ensure that that compliance supplement is maintained up to date. OADR again serves as the key management single audit liaison internally and externally, and we provide overall policy support from start to finish when it comes to single audits. Okay, so changing gears here, we are past the mid-hour here. The next topic I wanted to cover here is about OIG audits. And so you are all familiar. I'm not sure how many of you have had an OIG audit, but I'm sure you are all familiar with OIG audits. But just before getting into the details of it, I just wanted to cover some basic background about the the authority, again, the source of the authority for OIG audit. So that, as you can see here on the slide, I have the Inspector General Act of 1978 as amended, which was actually established. This act established the Office of Inspector General. So within the federal government agencies, and the idea is to ensure accountability, integrity, and efficiency of government operations as a whole. The act was initiated in the aftermath of Watergate scandal, which was instrumental in fostering an environment of independent oversight within the federal agencies. Subsequent updates or amendments were made to further enhance the scope and authority of the Inspector General, including authority to assess necessary records and information especially for investigative audits. But just here again, 3 bullets here summarizes the main purpose of the act. Here, as you can see, the OIGs are tasked with several core functions, right? So these include, again, in summary, first, conducting and supervising audits and investigations. These audits are specifically related to their own agencies' programs. And second, provide leadership and coordination and make policy recommendations, not just to promote operational efficiency and detecting, but also detecting, as well as preventing fraud, waste, and abuse. And third, or lastly here, they're also responsible for reporting their findings and recommendations for corrective actions to both the federal agency heads as well as to the Congress. Similar to single audits, our resolution process is the same. The idea here is the same, making sure that once OIG completes their review or issues a final audit, we would start with the review. But before that, we also have other key role to play before even the field work or the audit is initiated. Each year, the OIG AmeriCorps OIG reviews all grants, the grants that they are interested in. They have a specific criteria to determine what grant or what the specific grantee may be required to undergo an OIG audit. Once they make that determination, they will let us know that, for example, they have, they are going to be selecting these grantees for OIG for an audit for that particular year. The audit have typically an interns conference that happens with OIG with AmeriCorps, and in this case, representatives from Office of Audit and Debt Resolution, as well as the grantee colleagues who will join that entrance calls, where details about the audits will be provided to the organization that will be subject to the OIG audit. Once the field work and the audit testing is completed, there will be an exit conference. And again, that exit conference, there will be a release of the draft, a general update about what the auditor's findings are, and that will follow with the release of a draft report. And once the final report is issued, that's when OADR's resolution work really comes to picture. So in other words, we initiate formal audit resolution activities as soon as the OIG issues its final report. We start by reviewing the audit findings and recommendations. We have a responsibility to respond to the draft report actually before the OIG issues its final report, and similarly, the grantee does the same. And again, the principle is the same in terms of issuing a management decision. Within 6 months of the issuance of the report, we provide an opinion on or a decision to communicate to OIG, whether on what matters we agree with them, on what matters we specifically do not agree with them. For example, if there are monetary disallowances, while we commit in our initial management response that we will be reviewing the report, we will be making evidence-based decision once we review the auditor paperwork and the grantees and the auditees or the auditees documentation as well to make the final determination. Through that management decision, we communicate what we allow or what we disallow and the likes. And ultimately, again, similar principle, if there are open recommendations after 6 months of the issuance of the audit report, we will follow up with the auditee to make sure the remaining recommendations are closed within 12 months of the issuance of the audit report. That will be concluded or included in the notice of final action before concluding the audit formally. I think with that said, we can move on to the next area here, the next domain of debt management or debt collection. In summary, again, the source of the debt collection authority comes from the Federal Claims Collection Act of 1966, which is really the main source of authority for federal governments when it comes to debt collection programs. The Federal Claims Collection Act provides specific guidance on the use in collection of offsets, compromise or suspension or termination of collection activities, especially when a debt is determined to be uncollectible. So we in AmeriCorps, on behalf of the agency, when it comes to any disallowances related to grantees, we initiate and manage all those collection activities on behalf of the agency. The Federal Claims Collection also provides rules and governing rules for the transfer of delinquent debts. That, for example, when a debt is not paid on time, it will be managed by the Department of Treasury. There are specific procedures for which the Federal Claims Collection Act provides these guidelines. And again, it sets requirements for policies regarding classification of a debt for accounting purposes. For example, if a debt is deemed uncollectible, it provides guidance on how to write that off in the accounting of that particular federal agency. And we have our own regulations. I have included the reference there, Title 45 of the CFR, Part 2506, that provides specifics about our debt collection program, starting by defining concepts and providing general provisions related to a debt or a claim. Debt or claim, interchangeable, both same. And it talks about, for example, the procedures that we use about what the debt notice should entail, and the opportunity for review, because the debtor has certain due rights, and so it provides the specifics about the due rights of the debtor. And then lastly, the administrative offset. This is again for delinquent debts. If we deem a debt is uncollectible or is not uncollectible, if a debt is considered delinquent we have a referral program to refer to the Department of Treasury, where they will start their process of collecting by intercepting any payments that may be due to that particular grantee. So the Department of Treasury may intercept that payment or future payment in order to pay off or offset the debt that is owed to the federal government. Our process, again, here, we receive a disallowance notification that can happen internally or by grantees. Once we receive a report of a disallowance, we make an evidence-based decision to establish the debt. And following that, we issue a debt notice that formally establishes the debt. Our office also completes reviews and appeal, reviews for requests for reviews, as well as make recommendations to the CFO and the CEO for any appeals. We have two types of appeals that are directed to the CFO, and if the debtor is not satisfied with the outcome of the appeal, may also then move on to a CEO appeal. And so our office manages that entire process of responding to appeals from the start to finish as well. And overall, we provide, again, policy support in the implementation of all of the debt management activities when it comes to the establishment of the debt, as well as responding to appeals. Again, this is very much in summary. I'm moving on to the last piece, which is the indirect cost, just to make sure we have some time for Q&A. So in indirect costs, this is the last but not least of the domain where we provide support. And our role here is really when we are the cognizant agency. So when we are the cognizant agency, meaning when we have provided the largest dollar amount to your organization compared to any other federal source, technically we will be designated as your cognizant agency for indirect costs. What does that mean? It means if your organization wants to negotiate its indirect cost rate, in other words, have a federally negotiated rate, will enter into an agreement with AmeriCorps or start negotiation process, and we are the entity to do the negotiation on behalf of the not just on behalf of in this case, the agency, but on behalf of the entire federal government. So we review the grantee indirect cost rate proposal package. We do work with a partnering federal agency who help us in the final validation of the rate, but we issue the final NICRA or the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. We also review approvals for extensions of an existing rate. And as you know, every grantee is subject to one-time review, extension, excuse me. And we also maintain instruction documents related to e-grants, and we provide overall policy support to indirect cost rate as a whole, internally as well as externally with our grantee colleagues when it comes to interpretation of regulations, policy requirements, and the likes. And the last piece I really wanted to share here is related to indirect cost rate. You all, those of you who may have visited recently the Manage Your Grants webpage, you would notice that there is a new resource now available to you all. It's under the pre-award requirements section of the Manage Your webpage. There will be a new resource called Indirect Cost Guidance. We will be sure to share this PowerPoint slides with you all, and there is a link already included there, and just for ease of reference. So this new guidance, I've just pasted a snapshot of the table of content. As you can see, it provides the step-by-step guidance starting from distinguishing between direct and indirect cost rate, what options are available for your organizations to choose for when it comes to indirect cost rate, like how do you calculate your indirect cost rate in detail. It specifies all these options that are available to you. It also further goes on to talk about the negotiation process. If, for example, your organization is interested to negotiate its rate, or does not have a rate but want to obtain a new rate and negotiate a new rate, It describes the step-by-step process of what you need to be able to negotiate your rate. It talks about the role of the cognizant agency, and as well as provide guidance on the extension requirements for extending your existing rate. And it provides key resources to trainings, for example, best practices for budget management, developing your budget, because they're all like interconnected. So there are very helpful resources that are included. So we want this guidance to serve more like as a compendium. We're bringing all the different resources into one place so that it serves as a one-stop shop for you all to make your references easy to indirect cost guidance. Highly encourage referencing, and please feel free to, if you have any feedback about any of these, this resource or anything that I have talked about, to these contact addresses that I've listed, related to audits, debt management, and direct cost, or any other general matter. I know we have. I was hoping we would have about 15 minutes, but I ran over by about 3 minutes. So I'll stop there and open it for Q&A at this point. Megan, maybe I'll just hand it over back to you.
Hey, Idris, thank you so much. Great job. We can tag team this if you want. I'll just try to watch the chat and Q&A, and see if anybody has any questions and make sure we don't miss anybody. And where's the link to the slides? Angie, we will send out a follow-up, and we'll make sure that you have the slides in the recording.
I see there is a question about, can you talk about how the 510 fixed administrative, that's a percentage, cost rate relates to the use of a 10% de minimis rate? They are separate, two separate requirements. So your organization has an option, if first of all, so if you're an ASN grantee, which in this case you are, that's why you're here. If your organization does not have a negotiated rate, by default, you will use the 5% AmeriCorps fixed rate. But if you do not have a fixed rate, you also have the option of the de minimis rate. So in other words, simply put, while they are separate from each other, it depends on what makes sense for your organization to use. At the end of the day, your organization must be able to classify administrative costs versus direct costs, right? So have a methodology for classifying these costs. And so and again, it depends on your organization operations. If you decide that you want to use a 10% de minimis rate, you have that option. If you already have a negotiated rate and do not want to use the ASN fixed 5%, you also have that option. So it really depends at the time of your application. When you apply, you must specify what makes sense for your business and go on from there. I hope that helps.
And Joyce, there's another question in the Q&A box. I'm not sure if you saw it, but it says, as the prime grantee from AmeriCorps, we are responsible for doing management determination letters for our sub-grantees if they have any findings that are relevant to AmeriCorps. Is this correct? Do you have any guidance or templates for how those should be structured?
I'm not sure. So the management determination letter in terms of your responsibility. So there is under subpart F, there are specific responsibilities for the pass-through. If you're serving as a pass-through, your responsibility is to make sure that the audit of your subgrantee has been conducted in accordance with the scope of the subpart F and the GAGAS requirements. So can you repeat that question? Someone is asking, can you repeat that question? I just wanted, before I proceed, I want to make sure what is the intent there. So the requirement here is that whenever there are findings about your subgrantee, either in their internal control or they're in their compliance, your organization as the pass-through has a responsibility to follow up on all the findings of your subrecipient. Similarly, as we have responsibility to follow up on findings of your organization if there are findings in your report. So that responsibility here, if it's related to an AmeriCorps award, meaning to awards that you manage that were funded through AmeriCorps, you will have direct responsibility to follow up with your subrecipient. In this case, AmeriCorps will not have any responsibility. If you are interested to have a specific template, please reach out to the office. I think we should be able to provide you some templates, but I would strongly encourage you to reference the subpart F of the guidance, as well as your responsibility, as well as pastoral responsibilities. It provides a specific language in what should be included in the management letter. And but if you have a specific, need specific guidance in terms of developing these guidelines or templates, we would be happy to assist you with that. We do not have anything ready to provide for you, but we would be happy to work with you to develop these depending on the context that you want to address. Because again, the needs of every context may vary, and the type of program that you address may vary. It looks like you may also want to incorporate some of these templates as part of your subrecipient monitoring policy, because per the pass-through entity responsibilities stipulated under the uniform guidance, your organization must have a specific policy for subrecipient monitoring. And so for your subrecipient monitoring, you would need to have these tools and resources to guide your subrecipient organization when it relates to addressing these findings. So we would be happy to, again, reach out to auditresolution@americorps.gov. Depending on that specific context that you have, we would be happy to work in developing these resources with you, or guide you through developing these resources.
All right, I think we may take this. We'll see. I see there's one more that just popped in, so we'll try to take these quickly if possible. It says, if we are regarding the 510 rule for AmeriCorps, if we are using this method, and AmeriCorps is our cognizant agency, would our auditors say that we are or are not opting to use the 10% de minimis rate? It is one of the items on the single audit that confuses me. Thanks for your help.
Yeah, I mean, the opting part is absolutely your authority and your decision to make. So AmeriCorps provides these three options for your organization to choose. If we are the cognizant agency, in terms of the single audit, the only piece where the auditors conducting the single audit, the restriction that exists around it is that the same auditor cannot be engaged in preparing the proposal for your organization. So you need to just consider that restriction as part of your consideration. But in this case, it doesn't seem like you're going to be negotiating any rate, even if you are your cognizant agency. But if you decide to use the de minimis rate or the 5-10% rule, you don't have to negotiate anything. That's first thing. You only will be informing AmeriCorps that you will be using that specific method to claim your indirect cost rate. So your recovery of indirect cost rate does not require any further justification, because again, the AmeriCorps, the state and national 5-10% rule is fixed. There is no justification required. The de minimis rate, fixed rate, no justification is required. Only at the time of application stage or at the time of continuation of an award or receiving an award, you just need to inform AmeriCorps about your intent of what method you are going to be using or opting in this case. Because again, no justification is required. Full stop.
All right, and we'll take this last one. Is there an annual schedule for when agencies are picked for an audit?
That's a great question. It's there. It depends on. It's actually based on the fiscal year end date. So if the first criteria, as we talked about, is the money threshold, right? The dollar threshold. So if your organization, based on the current requirements of your of the uniform guidance, if your organization's direct and indirect total expenditures in federal awards reaches $750,000 or more, that's the first criteria that make your organization subject to a single audit. And then it's based on your, and again, that threshold, it's based on your fiscal year end date. So auditors will go based on your fiscal year end date. So it really, there is no specific timeline in that sense. And once you meet that, or that threshold, that's when the clock is, that's when the requirement basically kicks in for your organization.
All right.
And just to clarify there, you would be making that determination, right? So it's your organization's responsibility to make that determination, because then you would be procuring the services. For example, under subpart F, there are specific requirements for how you engage a firm. You would solicit proposals, you would procure the audit services. So you would be responsible to make that determination when your organization meet that threshold, and therefore ensuring that you obtain the necessary services to initiate the audit for your organization. Absolutely, would love to.
All right, thank you all so much, Idris. This was amazing, very thoughtful, lots of great information. Sounds like you are already having people that want to reach out to you and chat some more. So we're really grateful to you. Thanks for this great session.
Looking forward to. Thank you for having me, Megan.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.